Oliver Jeffers is one of the world's best-loved authors and illustrators of children's picture books. Oliver's latest book, Here We Are, Notes for Living on Planet Earth, isn't a storybook, but an introduction to the world for his first child. I started by asking him how he generally approaches his books, and how much in the past he's had a specific audience in mind when he writes and illustrates them.
I don't necessarily, when I'm making a book, start off thinking, well, what the kids want to hear and then trying to address that. It just so happens that a good number of kids share my sense of humour and my sense of curiosity. So my own target audience for the majority of those books is me, both me as an adult and my remembered worldview from when I was a kid. And I think because there's a degree of honesty in that and not really trying to talk down or presuming I think I know what children want to hear and sort of letting them into the way in which I think that's why both kids and adults enjoy them. I've learned over the years that the simpler something looks, often the more difficult it is to distill it back to that form. So once I can do that, then when I'm actually executing something, that's when you get to have a bit of fun with adding in extra layers and sort of Easter eggs or hidden things for the discerning eye. Picture books, you don't sell huge amounts of copies and you don't make a huge amount of money from royalties. So there was, at the beginning stages, I always knew I was going to have to supplement my income with something else. And in those early days, that was trying to sell paintings and getting commercial commissions. That always frustrated me because a job would come in and I would need to take it for money, and then it would end up sucking all the air out of all of the other things, all the other concepts that I had, and really I was just being a gun for hire at that point. And I knew that for creative satisfaction to occur, I would have to cut that off at some point, and I did, and it was that was definitely a decision, and then there was a massive leap into the unknown. But so really for the last 5 years, I have only been making the work that I want to make. So I don't think it's changed that necessarily, the actual projects, but it has, and it's evident in the new book that perhaps I'm a little more attuned to some of the finer and larger workings of society now, because I'm thinking about the world in which I'm bringing a son, and that has filtered through into my social media posts and really into this book. I had the idea for what became this book pretty early on, and then I've spent the majority of the time since he's been alive actually making that. So it's interesting now that the book is finished and it's just come out, and I'm going to be touring for a little while. It'll be the early stages of next year that life after this book sort of settles into our family home, and maybe then it'll start occurring to me the ways in which I'll talk to him about other things. But it's everything so far has been very focused on this project. It started off as maybe a book for new parents, sort of explaining the paradigm shift of looking after yourself to looking after this completely helpless little ball of life, which is a pretty huge jump really to make. So it was about new parenting to one degree, but it was also because I was watching things unfold in Western Europe and in the US, it was about, to a degree, social and environmental responsibility. But then, and it's funny how whenever you're looking at this tiny little baby, it makes you think about the perspective of and the grandeur of everything, and it really was about Earth's relationship to space. So I suppose the three main things in the book are about parenting, about being the shared responsibility of humanity, and Earth's place in space. I think whenever you do draw things down to their simplest forms, the truths can be fairly obvious and screamingly obvious, and I didn't necessarily set out to do that. It was only that I was writing these things down as I was saying to my son and sort of trying to write him a letter, that I saw it myself, and I thought, yes, these are the things I'm trying to teach him, but I'm also teaching myself or re-reminding myself, and there were a lot of the things that my mum and dad taught me when I was growing up. This is the first time I've ever written a full text before I've even thought about what it looked like, because normally I'm thinking about how it looks and what it'll sound like at the same time. But because I didn't necessarily know this was going to be a book at the start, I thought I was just writing my son a letter. That I had effectively a finished manuscript. Then I decided to turn it into a book. So it was the first time I was ever tasked with illustrating my own manuscript. And then I had to figure out, okay, well, what does this actually look like? And because it's quite a referential book, it's more like a science book in some ways than a picture book. there was a degree of obviousness about the way it should be tackled, but then that led to its own host of problems because there's no main character, there's a lot of information, like what is the best way to tackle this? So just sitting down with sketchbook and kind of picking apart line by line and concept by concept how these things might look and tie together. And then it was only through doing that I realised that there's a few devices I could use about, like, you know, the zooming in to Earth and the zooming out again, or then that head fake where you think you're zooming out but you're actually not. My most productive times in the studio used to be the evenings and weekends when there was nobody else really around or nobody was ringing or emailing, and it's just no distractions. But those are the sacred times now at home. So I'm home for dinner every day, and weekend is when we go out and do stuff together as a family. So I've had to become okay with not having those windows to be creative and figure out how to do the same amount of work in a smaller allocation of time. And that hasn't always worked, but it's the way that it is. I have a little bit of everything in my studio. I work in Brooklyn, and it's anybody who is an artist in New York knows that space is a very valuable commodity there. So I work in a studio smaller than I would like, and because I work quite quickly with a whole range of different tools, I'll work quickly, and it'll occur to me, oh, this might work for this, and then I'll need to grab it very quickly. So everything is labeled and clearly stored and put away. But it really is, it's a bit of everything. I've never been a master of any one particular medium or technique. For me, everything is ideas driven first or story driven first. But with this book, there is a little bit of everything in there. There's the majority of the colors come from watercolor and ink washes. Then there's some colored pencil, some gouache paint. Anything that's a large shape is done physically on piece of paper, paint on a piece of paper, and then I was bringing those images into the iPad and then doing some finishing touches on the iPad, just because it became very convenient to work from home as a new father and be on the road and continue to work. I was never able to draw using a tablet because it's an unusual thing to be looking at the screen at something being created that's actually happening with your hand. I tried it a couple of times, like, no, it feels unnatural. But with the Apple Pencil, I was able to do that on the iPad, and you can zoom in, which is a huge advantage. You can't do that with an actual piece of paper. But it's strange because there's zero friction, you know? It's like whenever you're drawing with a pencil across a piece of paper, there's that texture, there's that drag, the resistance, and that's just not there. So that is a strange sensation, which I don't know if you'll ever really get used to. It's just a different thing. I've always liked using my handwriting in the books. I wanted to do it a lot earlier in my career, we just didn't know technically how to. So the Incredible Book Eating Boy is the first example. There's a few, but I had to physically do that on the art, and then they had to remove that for the foreign co-editions, and then I had to write all the foreign co-edition versions of that, and I was making spelling mistakes in different languages, and they realized this is not a good idea, so we went back to just having a typeset font. Then I've been able to go off of that and write little asides that aren't necessarily part of the manuscript, but add a layer of my voice to it again. The next project is actually I'm working with this publisher, Rizzoli, who's a New York-based fine art publisher, about a monograph of the last 15 to 20 years of my work. But that will cross through fine art and publishing. And I've always sort of kept the two things separate to a degree, just because it confused people. But this will be a little bit of everything, because I think in a lot of ways the art that I'm making and the books that I'm making have been getting closer and closer and closer together, both in terms of style, but also in concept. And this is an opportunity to really put everything together and kind of show other people the connections between the things, and that they all come from the same place, they all come from the same brain.